Welcome to the Alka Seltzer Strength Lab. In this lab, you'll be reacting vinegar and an Alka Seltzer tablet. You're going to be able to determine how much sodium bicarb there is in Alka Seltzer. So let's see how you're going to do this. You can take a beaker and first you'll weigh it. Write down that weight in your lab. Then you'll add vinegar, 10 mils, and water, 30 mils. I think it might be 20. You'll have a chart in your lab manual that will tell you how much of each to add. You'll need to weigh that, and then you'll need to add 3 grams of Alka Seltzer. And if we zoom in on it, you will see that it's bubbling. There's a gas being given off. That gas is carbon dioxide. When the reaction's finished and it stops bubbling, you can pick it up and weigh it again. I somehow didn't get it on the scale, I guess. But you'll get a mass. That's interesting. There we go. We've got a mass that time. All right, so now let's look at your lab. By now this should look pretty familiar. You're going to write your title down and the purpose, 2 or 3 sentences telling why we're doing the lab. The background here is very important. We've got some key terms from chemistry that you're going to need to understand in order to understand the lab. Things like what is stoichiometry, molar ratios, and limiting reactants. You need to write a balanced reaction for Alka Seltzer and vinegar. That'll be in your background. The procedure, you need to just summarize the procedure. It doesn't need to be terribly long, more than a sentence or 2, and probably needs to include a chart or to show how much water and how much vinegar is in each of the 6 different reactions you're going to be doing. Okay, so here's your data. We're going to have the mass of the empty beaker in this column and the mass of the beaker with the water and vinegar in this column. This column is the mass before the reaction. It should have the mass of the beaker, water, vinegar, and 3 grams of Alka Seltzer. So what you end up doing is taking the numbers in this column and adding 3 grams. That'll be the mass before the reaction. The mass after the reaction is the mass that you took after the bubbling stopped. Okay, so then we've got calculations. We have the change in mass. Well, the change in mass is the difference between the beginning mass, which is here, and the ending mass, which is here. The change in mass is caused by the bubbling off of the carbon dioxide. So the change in mass is equal to the mass of carbon dioxide produced. So that first column is the grams of carbon dioxide. Using the molar mass, you should be able to figure out how many moles of carbon dioxide you have. And that's the second column. The third column, you'll use the molar ratios from your balanced chemical equation. However many, use your balanced chemical equation to figure out how many moles of sodium bicarb are reacted in order to make so many moles of carbon dioxide. Once you have the moles of the bicarb, you can use the molar mass here to calculate the grams of bicarb reacted. You need to show the calculations for just one of your trials. So pick beaker 1 and show all your calculations. I'd also like you to graph the mass of sodium bicarb versus the volume of vinegar. Use a scatter plot with smooth lines and markers. This will not be linear, so don't use a trend line. Then you'll need to calculate the mass percent of sodium bicarb in an Alka Seltzer tablet. And that is done by taking the mass of the bicarb and dividing it by the mass of the Alka Seltzer. And finally, we need a nice paragraph discussing how the limiting reactants were determined based on your data. in which trials was the vinegar limiting and where was the bicarb limiting. Include a general discussion of what happened during the reaction and relate it back to why Alka-Seltzer is used as an antacid. And lastly, did you meet the lab goals as stated in your purpose? Have a great week.